How do you define compassion?
So, how do I define compassion? So, I think compassion is when you show. Yeah, I think the word we were talking about was sympathy. So, when you show sympathy towards others or empathy for other people's problems, whether it's emotional, money problems, someone's in need of help. When you go in sympathy, I think compassion is the feeling you have that causes you to act to help that person out, right? So compassion's showing that you understand their situation and you have sympathy for their situation, and then it tends to lead to action sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I define compassion.
Explain what you think motivates people to act compassionately.
To have compassion towards someone, you typically have to have some empathy for that person. So obviously, people in your family you're very compassionate towards, right? Because they're close to you. Things that you care about. You might see homeless people or people, foster children or disabled veterans that you have compassion for, right? You understand their plight, you understand what they're struggling with, and you desire to help them, right? So the question was, what acts us to motivate? What was the question?
Explain what you think motivates people.
Motivates, yeah. So the motivation is typically that bond that you feel towards the person that's you think is suffering or in need of help or in need of your compassion.
Mm-hmm. Describe what factors determine how and when we act with compassion.
So I think the biggest thing with compassion is it's easier to show compassion to people you know well, right? It's a lot harder to show compassion to a stranger because people you know well, your safety's taken care of, you're not going to be threatened in any sense, you know how they're going to act to your compassion. And strangers you never know, right? There's acts of compassion with strangers that are received well. Sometimes they're not. So that's going to be one of the biggest factors. Also, the level of personal empathy you have for that person's plight. So I'm a veteran and I understand what veterans go through, even though I haven't served in overseas combat, but I can understand what they go through, right? So we have compassion for things I understand, right? And mom's going to have compassion for foster kids, right? Because she's a foster child.
Explain if you believe there are any limits to compassion. What are they and why do they exist?
Yeah, I think the most practical limit to compassion is your own safety and well-being. Is keeps people back, and sometimes it's physical safety, sometimes it's just psychological safety or perception of being embarrassed, right? So I know with certain people in New York, I will certain people I'll help out at times. Other people embarrassed to help people out. So sometimes I'm at the train station at the Penn Station, New York. I'll buy homeless people, KFC, and some of the other businessmen look at me like I'm crazy, right? But it doesn't embarrass me to do that. I think they probably would have compassion for it, but might be embarrassed to do that, right? So it's going to be a lot of different factors, and sometimes there's physical safety issues. So, not just talking about giving help to homeless people, but that's one where physical safety is also a concern, right? So you might not be compassionate if you're scared of the person or scared of the situation, right? Other limits to compassion, I guess, is just your ability, right, to help out, right? So some people feel that they can't help out enough, so they don't help out at all, right? So sometimes a little bit helps, better than no help, right? Many times it is, but a lot of people feel if they can't do enough, then they don't do anything, right? So I think those are some of the limitations, and most of it's our own how we perceive ourselves, I think, that limits compassion for others.
Thank you.
You're welcome.